All right, so we'll get started. We Last week we looked through a ton of these different laws, and we didn't have a whole lot of time to break that down. That was intentional. A lot of the work that you all did was work that you did in prep for it. And I'm sure that there are, as it marinated and as it stewed over the last couple of weeks, I'm sure that there are things that maybe you wish we had talked about, and I'm sorry that we didn't have time to do that last week. If there are still questions you have about that stuff, I'm happy to visit with you after we talk more today. But just one thing that I didn't say last week. I asked you all to come up with like a commandment or two that each of these case laws were related to. There weren't any right answers per se. And I think I said this a little bit last week. So if I'm restating it a bit, sorry. There are definitely some answers that are like wrong, but you can make an argument for a number of answers to that. So I don't have a key. You're not being graded. There's not red ink that's flowing. If you have questions about a specific law or two, or wanted to talk more about one of them, I'll be happy to hang out afterward for a little while, and we can talk more about that. But I didn't want to leave that loop unconnected. As we go today, we're going to see a little bit of the promise that God gives at the end of these case laws. And then we're going to see a ceremony that ratifies the covenant. We're going to take this in two chunks. The first chunk will be slightly shorter, and then we'll get to chapter 24, which we'll spend the bulk of our time tonight discussing. So I'd like two people to read the rest of Exodus 23. I'd like one person to read verse 20 through 26, and one person to read 27 through 33. Who'd like to read verse 20 to 26? Thank you, Reeve. I see you. You'll take 20 through 26. Who'd like to read 27 through 33 of chapter 23? Thank you, Sarah. You've got that. So Reeve, kick us off. Let us know what translation you're reading from.
All right, I'm reading from the Common English Bible. The pericope reads, God's promise, messenger, and land. I'm about to send a messenger in front of you to guard you on your way and to bring you to the place that I've made ready. Pay attention to him and do as he says. Don't rebel against him. He won't forgive the things you do wrong because I am with him. But if you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, then I'll be an enemy to your enemies and fight those fighting you. When my messenger goes in front of you and brings you to the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I wipe them out, don't bow down to their gods, worship them, or do what they do. Instead, you should completely destroy them and smash the sacred stone pillars to bits. If you worship the Lord your God, the Lord will bless you, your bread and your water, and I'll take sickness away from you. And no woman will miscarry or be infertile in your land. I'll let you live a full, long life.
Thank you, Reeve. Sarah, before we get to you, two things. Reeve, you got all those names and you got them perfectly. Well done. Thank you for taking that on. And another thing, you may have heard a term that Reeve used, pericope is I think what you said.
Yes.
If you try to use that term in Microsoft Word, it'll often correct it to periscope. But pericope is it's a Bible term that means the section. And so when you see the little titles that sometimes come in your Bibles, they're splitting chapters into pericopes. So that's in case you heard that word and we're kind of like, huh, what's that? That's where that comes from. Thank you, Reeve. Well read. Go ahead, Emily. I'm sorry. Bob, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm very confused. What section did he read? Because I thought we were reading 23, verse 20 through 27, and that there's differences in the Common English Bible, but not this kind of difference.
You're in Exodus chapter 23?
Exodus chapter 20, 22, I was on.
Ah!
I'll make a difference.
Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah, that's a little bit different.
Yes.
Sorry for that confusion. Yeah, chapter 23, verses 20 through 27 is what that was.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, we're all on the same page now. And so, Sarah, if you'll take us through the end of the chapter, let us know what translation you're reading from.
I'm in the NIV, and the online version doesn't have any of the section titles, the pericope. I get that right? Okay, first time I heard that word. Okay, starting with verse 27. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run. I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hittites out of your way. But I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate and the wild animals too numerous for you. Little by little, I will drive them out before you until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea and from the desert to the Euphrates River. I will give into your hands the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make covenant with them or with their gods. Do not let them live in your land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Well read. Okay, so let's spend a little bit of time digesting this part of the passage. This is God telling the Israelites what's going to happen when they get into this land of promise. What stuck out to you as we were reading this?
I think for me it was that God's not trying to tell them to overextend themselves. He says, do this in bit pieces. Don't try and, I'll lead you as far as you need to go, and I'll send things to scare away the people and make it easier for you in reasonable amounts. Right. Yeah. God's very much into the logistical details here. And is thinking through the implications. Good, Sarah. We're going to go to Bunny, then Gloria, then Diane.
What struck me as we were reading it was back in 25 and 26, that if they had, well, I guess 24 where they have to break everything up. But if they worship God and, they're not going to have any sickness, no miscarriages, plenty of food and water, full lifespan. We've never had a world where this was happening. And he promised it to them if they would but worship him.
Right. There are the preachers, those televangelists back before everybody was a televangelist in the season of COVID. But those preachers who promised health, wealth, and prosperity if you would just send your paycheck to me, right? And this is someone who, God promising this, God can actually deliver this. And it's like God is inviting them into a new Garden of Eden almost. Like God is recreating what it was at the beginning, where there's true fellowship and true communion, if you will but keep my commands, right? If you will worship me and me alone. Now, this if is almost a rhetorical if, because of course the Israelites are going to fail. They're human. But God is giving them this opening, right? This opportunity. I love how you pulled that to light, Bunny. Thank you. We're going to go Gloria, then Diane, then Bob and Peggy. Go ahead, Gloria.
Okay, I just want to say that God does give them a guardian angel to go with them. So that's an extra help that they didn't have before. And I suppose as an image that they can observe, that they can Oh, never mind. I forget my words.
You're good. You're good.
Thank you. It's somebody that they can that can remind them what all they need to be doing, so they do not
Right.
go back to the idolatry.
Right. So they don't go back. They don't fall back
That's
to
it.
what they were when they were in Egypt. Right. Good. I said Gloria, and I meant Gloria. I meant both Glorias, right? Because both of y'all wanted to say something. So I'm sorry. Gloria D, thank you. Gloria Munguia, then Diane, then Piggy and Bob.
Well, I wanted you to elaborate a little bit more, a little on the word hornet.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm reading from the NIV version, and it says, probably the word involves concrete imagery, and the focus of the statement is on the effects. Therefore, we're not to look for some historical agent to which the word metaphorically refers.
Right. Yeah. So that word that you're talking about, Gloria Munguia, is it's one of the earlier words in verse 28, where God is saying all of these things that are going to happen to Israel's enemies. So this idea of terror that happens in verse 27, I'll send my terror in front of you. That terror and that fright is going to cause, whether it's hornets, my translation, the New Revised Standard Version says pestilence. It's reminiscent to me of the plagues, that what happened to Egypt is going to happen to your enemies, sort of thing. That's the feel that I get from this. My Hebrew is very, very bad. So I'm not going to go and try to look it up in the Hebrew, because this is one of those words where in the footnote, mine gives hornets as an alternate reading. And then sometimes in the footnotes, it'll say like meaning of Hebrew uncertain. So if the scholars don't know the meaning of the Hebrew, then this pastor probably doesn't know either. And Bunny says that the New English Bible has panic. Sarah, did you want to add something to that before we go to Diane and then Bob?
Mine has the sirah, the hornet, may be so called from the Arabic, to lay prostrate, strike down because of the destruction occasioned by the violence of its sting. Apparently, it is exceedingly strong for its size, which is generally an inch in length. I get the impression that this is something similar to the murder hornets that we've been hearing about.
Yeah. Good gracious, yeah.
Yeah, they would be nasty to run into.
Not my favorite thing. So this is very much like, you don't want to be on the wrong side of this. This is going to do a number on you. And so if Israel is faithful to God, this is what God will do to Israel's enemies. And these the other thing that my Bible names is that terror and pestilence were often results and had to do with the idea of holy war. So that's some of what's going on here too. Thank you for asking that, Gloria. We're going to go Diane, we're going to go Bob, and then we're going to, I'm going to wrap up with one thought here, and then we're going to move to chapter 24. Go ahead, Diane. I saw your hand going. Go ahead.
Well, I was just struck by the fact that several times he stated that you are not to let any of these other cultures' gods into your land or to be with you, because they will catch you in a snare, as it said. Right. And I think that's something, that when you look back at it, that was a problem, because they didn't totally get rid of those other gods. And something we're still dealing with today, is sometimes, we do tend to let other things become a god to some extent instead of just God. And I also wanted to comment on Bunny's comment. I just thought that was interesting, that had they been able to truly follow him 100%, life would have been very perfect, like another Eden. And, they couldn't do it. And obviously we aren't doing it today. And then your comment about a pestilence being a holy war makes me wonder, is COVID-19 kind of a pestilence? And are we in some sort of holy war time again? I mean, you just have these thoughts sometimes about this whole pandemic thing. why it is happening as it is playing out.
Let me share with you something that Josh texted me earlier today. I don't know if y'all, let me take my video or the virtual background off here so you can see it. Okay, none. It says, whoever is supposed to go to Nineveh, just go already. Sorry, you can't. It's worth it. It's worth it. It's not going. Okay. Whoever's supposed to go to Nineveh, just go already. It's like, stop. And there's sometimes where I think we want to find an explanation for what's going on. And I think that maybe the explanation is similar to the explanation for, to some degree anyway, for racism in America. It's just in the water. It's not because of any one bad thing that any one person has done. It's because we're enmeshed in it, and we can be as good as possible, and yet sin still is an infection within us because that's the water that we're swimming in. So I wonder if that's some of what's going on too. Thank you, Diane. Those are good thoughts. Bob, go for it, or Bob or Peggy, whichever one of you.
Yeah, I was on the same wavelength as Diane, but I was wondering if this direction to not let them live in the land and, basically they'll snare you. But that wasn't really the message that Paul had, because he was coexisting with the pagans, and some of the former pagans were Christians in his church. So, and he didn't drive them from the land. So it's, what do you think about that?
Yeah. Thank you. That's an interesting question, Bob. This gets at some of what I was thinking about with this passage, and that's that this passage, and I'm going to answer your question. I'm not dodging it, but I want to say a couple things to build up to it. There are a couple things that we see in this passage that are reminiscent of stuff we've seen before. That God is promising that He will be with them. That I will give you myself, God says. I will give you a land, and I will give you a people. These hearken all the way back to God's promises to Abraham. Now, what that land, what that people, and what God being with you looks like is going to look a little differently from age to age. In this time, when God's covenant was strictly with the Israelites, the land was something very literal and something that needed to be protected in a way that it's not maybe as literal for us as Christians. And this is, let me take one step back. You will find faithful Christians and faithful pastors that will disagree with me on this interpretation. So some of this that you're getting is Joel's interpretation. So feel free to disagree, that's fine. But for us as Christians today, the physical land of the nation of Israel perhaps is not as important as the spiritual Israel, right, that we're pursuing. Again, there are some faithful Christians that would disagree with that statement. And they would say that Israel needs to have the borders that you hear described in this passage right here, and it needs to be free from idolatry. Some faithful Christians would argue that. But I think in Paul's time, what we see is an evolution of the covenant. We see that this covenant now is less about the physical, concrete things and is more about the internal spiritual things that make their way out as physical, concrete things. And so Paul is speaking, like you're referencing, what came to mind for me was Paul speaking at the Areopagus in Acts 16, where he's before the people of Athens and is telling them, hey, I was looking at all these idols, I was getting really distressed, and I saw one that said, to an unknown God. And what you trust in is unknown, I will declare to you as known. And then he gives the whole gospel message. So Paul works within the false gods of the time in order to bring to light the true God. I think ideally, right. Oh, sorry, Mark. I'll say one more thing. I think ideally, we would have one God and one God alone. And we would worship the God of Israel, the God of Jesus Christ, and we wouldn't have snares of other gods or other idols. That's not the world that we live in. while the Israelites here are trying through God's help to set up a new Eden, that's no longer the plan anymore. The plan now is to be a called out people. That's what church means in the Greek. Ekklesia is called out ones. And so we're called to be a people that sets ourselves apart, not so much completely out of the world, but set ourselves apart by showing the world who this God is by any means necessary. I don't know if that answers your question, Bob. Maybe that begins to go in a direction to help answer it. But I hope that gives you something to think about. Mark, go ahead, and then we're going to move to 20.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, Paul addresses the believers by saying, don't team up with those who are unbelievers. How can goodness be a partner with wickedness? How can light live with darkness? What harmony can there be between Christ and the devil? How can a believer be a partner with an unbeliever? So, I mean, I think there's that within we're called to reach out to the world, but there's an admonition there that we're not, to partner up with those that are in direct opposition to the faith.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reference, Mark. That passage from 2 Corinthians is often used to tell high schoolers. This happened at the church I grew up in. It was used to tell us, hey, don't date non-Christians. And there's some wisdom there, to be sure, but more important, I think, in that passage is, to be careful who you call a partner. To be careful who you align yourself with, because ultimately the closer you get to somebody, and that's some of what God's telling Moses here, is if you leave God's in the promised land, they're going to drag you down and ensnare you, as well-meaning as you may be, because whenever we make some sort of an allegiance with idolatry, it is infectious. It has a way of breaking outside the bounds that we hold it in, which is one of the reasons that, worship the Lord your God alone and don't make graven images are the first two commandments. Because if we can keep these, to some extent, we're going to be able to keep the rest. Making sure that you're worshiping the only one who's deserving of worship, that's pretty integral. And the more you partner up with somebody or people who don't do that, the more you're going to be dragged, just like Solomon was with his many wives who were from all sorts of different other nations. Thank you for finding that reference, Mark. Let's hit chapter 24. We're going to read the whole thing. And there's going to be a couple of things in 24 you're going to be like, I wonder what that's about. We'll talk through them. I'd like 3 readers. I'd like somebody to do verses 1 through 8, somebody to do 9 through 14, and somebody to do 15 through 18. Who'd like to do verses 1 through 8 of chapter 24? Thank you, Gloria D. How about 9 through 14? Thanks, Brittany. And then Emily, I saw your hand. Would you like to do 15 through 18? Great. Gloria D, I'm asking you to unmute and then you can kick us off.
This is from the New Revised Standard Version. Cool. Then he said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship at a distance. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him." Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice and said, "All the words that the Lord has spoken we will do." And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 pillars corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed oxen as offerings of well-being to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he dashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient." I continue. Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people and said, "See the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words."
Thank you. Well read. 9 through 14. Go ahead, Brittany.
It's NIV. Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of sapphire, clear as the sky itself. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God, and they ate and drank. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and commands I have written for their instruction." Then Moses set out with Joshua his aide, and Moses went up on the mountain of God. He said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we come back to you. Aaron and Hur are with you, and anyone involved in a dispute can go to them."
Thank you, Brittany. Let's finish it off with 15 through 18. Go ahead, Emily.
And this is the old RSV. Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the 7th day, he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. And Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights.
Excellent. Okay, so here we have the Israelites basically saying once more, "We're in, God. You've given us the 10 Commandments. You've given us this big book of the covenant that, our Sunday school class spent, or not Sunday school, our Wednesday night, Thursday night class spent all last week chewing on. We get all that. We're in." So of course, nothing bad will ever happen again, right? That's the hope. And they're able to come face to face with God to some degree. They're able to behold God. I want to highlight a couple of things from early in chapter 24, and then I want to spend a little bit of time with a covenant meal that happens there. So you'll notice that Moses builds this altar to God, and this altar has 12 pillars. These 12 pillars are for the 12 tribes of Israel. Whenever you see the number 12 in scripture, always think of, oh, there are 12 tribes in Israel. That's why Jesus has 12 disciples, of course, and that's why this altar has 12 pillars, because it's all of Israel getting together and saying, "We're in." So 12 is sort of the complete number of Israel, and Moses sacrifices on this and consecrates it along with the people. Now, as Moses does this, and I'm going to share a quick slideshow with you here. As Moses does this, he invites a bunch of elders up with him for this covenant meal that they have with God. So there are 70 elders along with some of their priests, right? Nadab, Abihu, and Aaron. These, I think Nadab and Abihu, if I'm remembering correctly, are Aaron's two sons. And so Moses, along with the other priests and these 70 leaders, go up the mountain to meet with God. And you may have noticed that there are three important components in the ceremony in order to ratify this covenant. Did anybody catch what those three important components were? This isn't meant to be a trick question, but it's not. This question is not worded as well as maybe I could. There are three things that are used in the ratifying of the covenant. If you think you might know one of them, go ahead and unmute or raise your hand and say, what's one of the things they use to ratify the covenant?
Blood.
Yeah, Gloria D says blood. Emily Hobby, go ahead.
The blood.
What's it, Emily? Yeah, there's.
offering.
Thank you. Sorry, I got it that time. There's a burnt offering, yeah, which then is going to become food. So you've got the blood, you've got food, and there's one other thing that they've got with them.
You've got the Book of the Covenant.
Yeah, you've got the Book of the Covenant. That's something that I didn't include, but that's actually really, really crucial and important. So really there's four things, right? They're covenanting with this Book of the Covenant. They've got the food from the burnt offering. They've got the blood of the burnt offering. And the one other thing, and again, this is, I maybe could have asked this question a little better. The other thing they've got is they've got drink, right? That's part of the meal is you need blood, you need food, you need drink. And then of course you've got this covenant that you're ratifying. What else happens in the life of the church with food and drink?
Oh.
Communion.
Yeah. In some sense, this covenant meal is the first communion. There's one sense in which that's what's going on, where the people of Israel are having true and full communion with God. They are just entering into this covenant. They are, in some sense, because they haven't been, being held to this law before now, they're in some sense without sin and pure, even though, of course, they're sinful people. This is the beginning of this covenant that God has here with the Israelites, the beginning of this Mosaic covenant. And so they've not broken this covenant yet. So they're able truly to commune with God. How neat is that? I mean, that's like, it's mind blowing. This is what we aspire to on the other side of eternity, what we hope for. So we see some image of God in the second chunk of this chapter. How's God described? Oh, Lori, I see you making some motions. You can go ahead if you had something.
Well, it was a devouring fire.
Yeah.
That's what it said. I can't imagine.
Yeah, Lori, you saw in verse 17, the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire. Good. What other descriptors do we see? Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Initially, that he said that it says that they actually saw the God of Israel, and underneath his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli.
Yeah.
But that God did not raise his hand against these leaders. They saw God and they ate and they drank. Right. Yeah. Since they've not broken the covenant, seeing God isn't going to result in death. They've not yet broken the covenant. This is going to come up later where God tells Moses after the golden calf situation, you cannot see me and live. But here, since they've not yet broken it, they can see God and live. But even in spite of that, the focus immediately shifts from God. Did you notice this? It immediately shifts from God to God's feet. Mm-hmm. Like even in the purity of an unbroken covenant, they're not able to dwell on God's face. They go straight down to God's feet, and he's walking on, the New Revised Standard Version says, a pavement of sapphire stone. I think, Sarah, you said lapis lazuli. Yep, mine describes it as lapis. Mm-hmm.
Yep, mine too.
Blue as the sky.
Mm-hmm. And there's one other descriptor of God here that I noticed. Maybe y'all see other things, but there's another way that God's described. This is maybe a tricky one here.
Glory?
Go ahead, Bunny. Yeah. So the glorious, yes, and I think that's the glory of God is being obstructed to some degree from the vision of the Israelites by this cloud. And instead of going with glory, I went with cloud, but I think that glory is a perfect way to describe it. Actually, no, I said the glory of the Lord was a cloud. So yeah, you're exactly right, Bunny. That God is glorious in this respect, and that the appearance of God's glory was like a devouring fire. So God is not described. It's all of these things kind of around God, that God has an effect on creation when God inhabits creation. This is what we're called to do as Christians. As people who bring God's Spirit with us everywhere we go, we're called to have an effect on creation and on human beings wherever God may take us. That maybe we're not walking on pavement of sapphire stone, right? But the ground on which we walk is going to be different, ideally, for us having walked on it. We're not going to be going around as clouds, right? We're a little more substantive than that. But there are times when God's glory is going to manifest itself in a way that other people can see, and they might not know how to describe it. The only way they may be able to describe it is a cloud. There are going to be other times when we're going to be, whether we want to be or not, we're going to be a devouring fire, because our life and our life lived faithfully is going to bring to light the ways that other people don't live faithfully, even when we don't intend it. I have a friend who shared with me that when they're at work, people talk about regularly the fact that this person doesn't use swear words. And it's become kind of a joke among this person's colleagues. But the reason that this person doesn't cuss at work is because of this person's faith. And that sometimes can be a devouring fire, because what it does, even without words, it's highlighting the fact that your words have power. And those of you who don't pay attention to the words that you use, me paying attention to the words I use is going to highlight the fact that you don't. And so there are going to be times when the appearance of God's glory in our lives will manifest itself as a consuming fire to those around us, whether we intend for that or not. Everybody clear so far on this? So even though we are not God, right? That's clear. We are called to be little gods, little Christs in and around the creation that God has sent us into. And this covenant highlights some of the ways that God transforms creation just by being present in it. We also see this covenant come to light in the book of Hebrews. And I want to read a chunk of the book of Hebrews for you. You can follow along here, or you can flip in your Bibles to Hebrews. That's fine. I'd love it if at some point this week, and I know some of you are doing the New Testament reading plan, you're reading a chapter a day anyway, but if you can make some time to read Hebrews 9 at some point this week, you'll see a number of echoes of the story of Exodus in Hebrews 9. There are also some echoes from Numbers 19 is the other chapter that's referenced, which has some similarities here to Exodus 24. But I'm going to read this chunk of Hebrews to you here. This is what the writer of Hebrews says. Hence, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood. For when every commandment had been told to all the people by Moses in accordance with the law, that's what we were just reading about, Moses took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and he sprinkled both the scroll itself, the book of the covenant, and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant that God has ordained for you." And in the same way, he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship. Now that's from Numbers 19. We don't have the tent and the vessels used in worship yet, but the author of Hebrews is referencing a couple things. But this next piece is key. The author of Hebrews says, "Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood. And without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins." So when we think of this as possibly the first instance of communion, we can also recall when Jesus instituted communion and how it was instituted in perhaps the opposite way. that Jesus shared a meal with friends in faith that the blood of the covenant would hold in his sacrifice. Here, the blood of the covenant needed to hit first before God could share a meal with the Israelites. But in the New Testament, in communion, Jesus has that communion in trust, that the blood of the covenant, the blood of the Lamb, will suffice to purge sin, to justify his followers. And I think that some of this mirroring is just really cool. But I've talked for enough. I'm going to pitch it back to you all now that I've shared a little bit of my thoughts here. What did you think of some of the stuff that we heard in this chapter 24? What were things that popped for you here? Go ahead, Mark.
I think what's remarkable is that the elders and Moses actually had a meal in God's presence, right? I mean, that's pretty, it's indescribable. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's mind-blowing. Go ahead, Jim.
It seems to me that they've kind of turned the corner, because now everybody is saying, oh, whatever the Lord says, we will obey. And if we keep going back to when we first started this, it was this, what? No, I'm not going to do that. No. Now they're saying, and they said it twice, we're going to do everything the Lord, we'll obey everything the Lord tells us to do. So maybe for a little bit, they've turned the corner.
Right. It's sort of like when things are good at work and, your boss is asking you to do a bunch more things and you're like, yeah, I'll do all of those things. And then, later on when things are not as exciting, not as good, it's like, darn it, why'd I agree to those things? I think we may see a little buyer's remorse from the Israelites later on, but for now, they're feeling good. This is the honeymoon period right here. Sarah unmuted. Before you say something, Sarah, let me just say what I saw Brittany put in the chat. She said that she works with a lady who's never down or negative or talks bad about anyone or anything. Yeah, those people, sometimes I love working with those people and other times I hate it because it's like, darn it, now I'm being convicted. Now you are bringing God as a consuming fire, as a devouring fire before me. I don't like it.
I adore her, but especially when there's something I'm trying to express and she's just smiling about it. I'm like, I don't understand you. I mean, I envy you, but I don't get it.
Right.
I knew somebody like that.
Well, and God doesn't call us to be Pollyanna-ish. However, God does call us to rejoice in the Lord always. Bunny commented, and then we'll hear what Sarah has to say, and then we'll go to Gloria D. Bunny commented, we share a meal with God each communion. Yeah, there's something profound and remarkable about the communion liturgy and about taking communion, where we aspire to this sort of fellowship with God and with one another. Thank you for mentioning that, Bunny. We'll go Sarah, and then if Gloria D has something, and then Dave, were you raising your hand a second ago? No? Okay. Go ahead, Sarah, then Gloria D.
I couldn't help but read this and go there, well, do whatever you say, we'll obey, and thinking, next chapter. I could not help knowing what was coming to be sitting there going, yeah, right, guys. Although we all do that. I can think of times when I've sat there saying, I'll do that, Lord, I'll do that. And then it's, oops, Lord, right. I need to ask your forgiveness again. Right. So,
what can possibly go wrong, right?
I love what you said, Brittany. It's like a kid in trouble. I'll do anything. I'll do chores for the next 5 years. Just don't make me do this. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you will. Go ahead, Gloria D.
Yeah, I was noticing that the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. Yeah. And then on the 7th day, he called to Moses out of the cloud. So it's still the 6th and the 7th.
Yeah, yeah.
the day of
You're,
the Lord.
you're seeing the
Mhm.
Sabbath there. That there's a way that God can make a day holy by working on it, right? That God can call to somebody, and that makes the day holy.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see that when Moses goes up there, Moses stays there for 40 days and 40 nights, and nobody's allowed to come up there.
Sure.
Moses isn't bringing food and water up there. He is subsisting on the presence of God. And whenever you see, again, there, I don't want to get too much into the numbers of Scripture because people can take that too far, right? But there are certain numbers to be on the watch for. 7 tends to be a perfect number, the number of God. 6 tends to be an imperfect number, the number of human beings. That's why in Revelation we see the number of the Antichrist is 666. It's the number of human beings. But when you see the number 40 days and 40 nights, that's like an era, right? That's what it's describing. There's some sort of seismic shift that's happening. In the flood, the rains pour down for 40 days and 40 nights. Here, Moses is on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. We see it with Jesus in the wilderness. There are a couple other places we'll see it as well. We see it with the Israelites in the wilderness as well for 40 years. That there's a number of completeness going on here with 40. So there's some numbers. Oh, go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
I think Elijah fled for 40 days and 40 nights, as I recall.
Yes. When Elijah's fleeing from the wrath of Jezebel, he goes to this very mountain that Moses is on. Good. We've got time for one more thought if somebody wants to offer another thought or has another question. And then I want to give us a map of what the next couple of weeks will look like before we go. All right. Well, let me reiterate then that this is what we're called to do. This is who we're called to be, a people that is fully committed to this covenant. We don't have the book of the covenant, and we're not committed to these laws, but we are committed to loving God and to loving neighbor. We mess this up regularly, but Jesus' blood covers a multitude of sins. That's the promise that Hebrews really gets into, that we are not under the first covenant that was a shadow of the heavenly things that were to come. We're under a covenant with a great high priest who was tempted in every way, who was like us in every way, and yet was without sin. And that's the good news of the covenant we get to live under. Sarah, did you want to add to that?
Just the verse of the day that I got from YouVersion today is, love doesn't do anything wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is what fulfills the law.
Let's end on that. Sarah, would you pray us out, and then I'll have a couple comments on what we're doing for the next couple of weeks?
Sure.
Thanks.
Beloved God, we thank you for this time together to share the history of your people and to recognize how it resonates even today with us. The commands that you gave them, the command that you give us, help us to love our neighbors, love one another, and remember that love will do no wrong to another. Be with those of us who are struggling with depression, COVID, cancer, all the unnamed things, grief, and help us to remember that this too will pass and that you are with us always, each and every day. We are never alone, no matter what we may feel. Be with us in the coming week. Help us to always look to you, and may your will and your promises always prevail. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Sarah. Amen and amen. For the next couple of weeks, we're going to be in the midst of a ton of descriptions of the tabernacle, of the holy stuff and objects that Israel will be using. I am of the opinion that these are good to know about, that these are helpful for us to think about. And I'm also of the opinion that I don't feel confident enough in my knowledge of the old tabernacle and of all of these holy, things. I'm not confident enough in my knowledge to be able to have a class on each chapter of these things and to make it be like not boring. So what I'm going to ask of you all is to spend a little time reading over the next couple of weeks chapters 25 through 30, through 31 of Exodus. We may be able to cover all of that in one go next week. We may need to take 2 weeks to spend some time with it and to kind of get at some of the symbolism of these different things. But we're not going to read every word in Bible study. I'm going to ask you all to do some of the work outside of this. So definitely next week we'll be spending some time in these weeds. Possibly for the next 2 weeks we will. But then either in 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to kind of go back to regularly scheduled programming where we'll be reading through chapter 32 and we'll be talking about it together. But for the next week or next 2 weeks, I want you to come to class having read the stuff that we'll be looking at. And if there are questions that you have about that you want to come with, you're of course welcome to do that. But we'll be looking at some images of the tabernacle, the images of some of the priestly vestments, stuff like that, as much as artists can render them from thousands of years afterwards. That sound good? Excellent. I will be